What's going on, everyone? We are here for episode 3 of the Invincible Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And I figured with the new year coming up, we would talk about maybe some goal setting, especially in terms of the martial artist mindset, whether you're practicing jiu-jitsu or whatever other martial art it may be. On top of that, I think stages of development would be a really good topic as well to cover, because a lot of us are setting goals for ourselves when the new year comes around. It seems to be a popular trend that's pushed upon us in terms of the new year and the new you. And everyone's going to get motivated and go to the gym for 2 weeks before, they fall back into their same patterns or, whatever it may be. But in other words, we're going to cover the belt ranking system, right? Because essentially the belt ranking system is just to identify stages of development within a martial arts practitioner. Obviously this is going to come from my own viewpoint, from my own experience, how I personally look at things when it comes to belts, why they're important, why they're not so important. They seem to be a little bit of a paradox and a double-edged sword. So we'll get to all of those reasons. And then what you can do is just kind of think about where you're at on your martial arts journey. And, compare, right? Because there's a lot of there isn't a lot of I guess there are some hard lines in terms of identifying what belt someone should be. But at the same time, those lines get blurred very, very easily. And there's a lot of circumstances that, cause that. So we'll go over that as well. I'm not exactly sure when the different colored belts started becoming a thing. But I'm pretty sure that there was a point in time where they didn't exist, right? It's like you wore a belt to hold your kimono or your gi top together, and that was the reason, right? As Bruce Lee would say, the only thing belts are good for is to hold your pants up, which obviously sends a hint on whether or not they're actually the most valuable thing, right? Because someone can spend their entire life training martial arts, never receive a belt, and still develop the skill of a high-level black belt, right? So if that's the case, then what are they good for, right? I personally, follow the belt ranking system. I think that when it comes to short-term gratification, for retention, for the business model, I think that's when these things really actually start to make sense, right? Because it's kind of a way of penetrating through people's consciousness in terms of those thoughts of self-doubt, right? Because a lot of us, we look for the approval of others, right? Our society is structured in a hierarchical way to where we look to people within that hierarchy for approval, right? And essentially, it's a power struggle that people go through, right? So they look for these moments of approval that give someone the idea that they're on the right path, right? But it's my personal opinion that a person has the capability within themselves to realize whether or not they're improving, right? And I think it really comes to a maturity of certain qualities of thought that will allow somebody to do this. So we'll definitely get into that as well. But, I was teaching in like a traditional setting for a very long time. There was a point where my school was primarily a children's martial arts school, right? And children absolutely love the belts, right? Adults have a busy life, and, you know, depending on where the person is at, they just might not give a shit, right? And I actually prefer it that way, to be honest, because then I know the person's training for the right reason, you know, or whatever their reason may be. If it's right for them, then it's good. So let's just let's think, right? So in jiu-jitsu, there's white, blue, purple, brown, and black. In a traditional martial arts setting, maybe like your average taekwondo studio, karate studio, whatever it may be, right? There tends to be like way more belts, right? And a classic business model is to, you know, every 6 months, every year, oh, geez, some schools like every few months, they want to have a belt promotion. They want to charge for belts. They want to, you know, give special techniques out to when you reach a certain belt. They want to place you in a specific part of the classroom when you reach a certain belt, right? So this status, this title comes with all of these little perks, right? When you reach this belt, you'll learn this weapon, or when you reach this belt, you'll learn this form, right? And meanwhile, you know, somebody that might be a little bit higher up in the ranks is a goofball and trips over their feet. They get to learn a new form or learn a new technique. Meanwhile, the maturity and the athleticism and the ability to perform techniques by the guy next to them who's 3 ranks lower could more than likely pull those things off, but you got to pay for the next 3 belts in order to reach that place, right? So there's like this, there's a business aspect to it that I don't necessarily agree with, and that's why I really resonate with jiu-jitsu a lot. And that's because it's organic. How you learn techniques, it's very organic. No one's going to stop you from learning a specific technique. Well, maybe not all the time, maybe not at all schools, but for the general ethos of the jiu-jitsu world, people progress and they pick up techniques, and, you know, obviously we see the effectiveness of the application will determine how skilled somebody is, right? And the crazy part is you can have some of the most basic standard techniques and make them extremely high level through experience, through learning the details, right? So what's my point is experience really shows in a jiu-jitsu gym, right? Whereas maybe in some other formats, it doesn't show as clearly. And you have this wide range of skill levels amongst a bunch of different belts, right? So I don't think that's necessarily good if belts are going to identify a skill level. If they're going to identify how much money you've invested or how much time you've invested, that's one thing. So I think there's a little bit of a conflict there. I think when it comes to kids, you want to keep them on the mat, you want to keep them motivated, right? But at the same time, you don't want to give them this illusion that they are better than other people because they have such a belt, or that they're even more skilled because they have such a belt, right? Because you could be, you know, it's so funny. You always hear that joke of like, oh, my niece is a black belt. Could she beat you up? It's like, well, how old is she? Oh, she's 12. It's like, okay, dude, are you that disillusioned? Like, I'm a grown man. We're talking about a 12-year-old girl here. So there's like this really weird, I don't know, like you would think that such a thing would be common sense. So it creates this really weird illusion on people that don't train as well. So I love jiu-jitsu for that reason, because normally a blue belt will always lose to a purple belt, right? Purple belt, I think the line starts to get a little fizzled because there are some nasty purple belts out there. But for the most part, right, a purple belt should lose to a black belt, right? So why don't we go through the belts and just kind of talk about some things that an individual should be focusing on. And we'll start to like talk about these hard lines or these blurred lines that lie between the belts, right? I think one of the big things to point out is standards of the individual gym are normally very different, right? And you can find yourself in a place where the instructor just does not hand these belts out, man. Like, you need to work your ass off in order to get your belt, right? I'm more along those lines. There definitely has to be this clear distinction for that individual, right? But a lot of the times, you could see some of these high level schools, they're putting out blue belts in ADCC trials and they're doing well, right? We even know of some examples that people are actually winning. So when it gets to that extreme, I have to ask myself, well, like, what's the point of the belt? Where does that line lie when, someone so low in the ranks is doing such a good job? And it could just be that the instructors of those individuals' technique understanding is so far beyond the general consensus that those things need to be performed at a certain rate, at a certain caliber in order to, progress forward. So there's a lot of things here, but as a white belt, right? Let's say you're in your first 6 months to a year and a half, sometimes 2 years of your journey, and you're a white belt. I was talking to somebody that's brand new to jiu-jitsu today. We're on a holiday break, so it's only open mats at this moment, and we're about to step into the year 2024. So we're just kind of keeping things lax the last week of this year. And great guy. He's so enthusiastic, and he really has this drive to learn, right? There's no worry about losing or not understanding. It is a full dive into technique and understanding. Like, he has some previous martial arts experience as a kid, but just an amazing quality of any white belt is somebody that comes in and they just become a complete sponge, right? Like, they don't go balls to the wall and try and win no matter what, even though they don't have the skill to do so. It's just a constant influx of questions. I keep finding myself here. What's the deal? Right? I keep getting into this position. What can I do? What are some principles that I need to know? Right? So as a white belt, guys, you're going to learn what not to do first. Because most of the things you're going to be doing are going to be mistakes. You're not going to be in dominant position 90% of the time, right? And that is a hard bullet for a lot of people to bite, because you may be some guy, you've excelled in other sports, you consider yourself an alpha male, and you lift lots of heavy weights in the gym, and you think that you have this ability to really defend yourself, and then you come in and you get whooped by like a 120-pound woman whose technique is good, right? And you realize you don't know shit, right? And that's hard for people to go through. And their thoughts get the best of them, and they become extremely inconsistent, or they simply just don't come back, right? And it's not that jiu-jitsu wasn't for them. It's just that they weren't approaching it in the right way, and that thought process got the best of them, and they would rather be, maybe a big fish in a small pond, or just stay the big fish that they were in their other gym or in their other sport, or like accepting the fact that you don't know shit is really hard for people. So as a white belt, that might be a humbling lesson, but that might be the best lesson for you as a human, right? Because if you can't be a person that enters an unfamiliar environment and become the person that is the sponge, that it just wants to learn and isn't worried about how fast they dominate over another person, you will learn techniques so fast because you'll be open. You won't be insecure, right? So, as a starting white belt, that's a really good place to start. Now, the most important thing for I think a white belt to focus on is standard, like bread and butter jujitsu. Building a really strong foundation with the basics will carry you way further than you would ever expect, right? Meaning basic guard, closed guard, butterfly, half guard, right? Meaning one or two ways of passing the guard. How to hold mount, how to hold side control, how to not fall on your face, right? How to post, how to distribute your weight. Learning these different mechanisms of control, like how do I control the head? How do I pin the shoulders? How do I control the hips, right? Back control, right? Standard submissions, Kimura, key lock, arm bar, right? Rear naked choke. And it's funny, right? Because as a white belt, you might find yourself practicing these techniques so much, and you think because you got it memorized, and maybe you pulled it off on a few other white belts, that you know the move. And maybe for your current level of development, you know it. But you will find that even as you go through blue, purple, brown, black, you find yourself coming back to these bread and butter techniques and unlocking new details at which your eye could have never seen at that level of development, right? So I think another thing to understand is that even though you think you got it, you don't got it. And you shouldn't turn your eye away from the basics no matter what belt you are, right? And you will find that when you roll with an extremely high level black belt, right, that person's understandings of the basics is just on a whole nother level, right? So definitely something to consider. Really value the basics more than you think that you ever should, right? Because as this position, right, of you transitioning out of this white belt stage and into this blue belt stage for the first time in your mat life, you're not going to be the person at the bottom of the barrel skill wise. And what I mean is maybe you've been in it for a year and you're about to get your blue belt, or you're somewhere along those lines. There are going to be new people coming into the gym that were in your position a year ago, right? And you'll be the person that will finally be able to implement those techniques on people, right? And then you start to drift your attention into a little bit more difficult techniques because now you have more people to practice on, right? So normally around this stage of blue belt, you have this greater understanding of the fundamentals, right? You know how to get from point A to point B. You know how to maybe hold somebody down in some of these positions. Control is far greater than when you first signed up or first started jiu-jitsu, right? Now, the cool part about becoming a blue belt is, you're one rank up on this hierarchical ladder, right? And this is where normally people drop off, right? Why is there such thing as the blue belt blues? It's quite an interesting thing because a lot of people laugh about it, right? There's like common memes that will run around the jiu-jitsu culture. And one is about like, your buddy gets their blue belt and they're never seen again, right? And another one is like the purple belt always shows up late to the warm-ups, right? We're going to talk about that stuff because there's a psychological factor that comes along with this position in the hierarchy, right? And in the individual's journey itself. And we tend to just make jokes about it, but don't actually identify why people do that. It's not a jiu-jitsu thing. It's a human thing, right? And we can see that there's patterns of behavior along somebody's journey, but no one actually ever goes and talks about it. So you get your blue belt, and now you have this whole class of people beneath you at a certain skill level that you can start practicing techniques on more. And this, in my opinion, is a golden stage for the development of jiu-jitsu, because it's the first time where you are not just always learning what not to do, right? But you can actually put yourself in dominant positions and practice things, right? So this is a really important time for you to start thinking to yourself, well, what are some things that I really want to get good at, right? And you should have a general idea of what positions you enjoy, right? Now you have somebody to get to those positions with and work on your offense, right? You've been doing a lot of defense as a white belt. Okay, so now the tides have turned slightly with this one, with these white belts that you have access to now. And it's really important to start to pinpoint, right, what sort of things you want to excel at. My recommendation is you never steer away from back control and mount, right? You never steer away from something like a close guard. As I said, these fundamentals are just so important, right? But you might find yourself like, I'm more of a triangle guy, or I'm more of I really like the front headlock and grabbing people's necks. And like, so start to think like, what submissions are you naturally gravitating towards, right? And start to hone in on those just a little bit, right? From these fundamental positions. So you still have this concept of practicing this, really dialing in your control still, right? But now that you have people to work on that aren't as good as you can start to play out these techniques a little bit more. And the way I recommend you do that is you focus on one or two techniques at a time, right? Typically, I tell people to work on the same move for like a month or two, right? Maybe even 3 months. There are some people, I find that they're just all over the place, right? They want to learn this and they want to learn that, and they just want to roll, or like whatever the reason is, like they're scatterbrained, and they never keep their attention focused on one particular technique for a long length of time, right? And I think that's because they don't realize the domino effect that will take place, right? So if you're doing an armbar, there's a good chance when your friend defends, triangles will open themselves up, right? So by consistently going for the armbar, you find new opportunities within the blueprint of defenses from your opponent to get good at other moves, right? But had that blueprint not become memorizable to you, your chain of attacks wouldn't progress, because you're just like giving up on the armbar or that position and moving on to the next thing. So really starting to study and work on your offense as a blue belt, I think is a really fun stage. But why do people just go missing the second they get their blue belt, right? It's almost like, as a white belt, the blue belt is a foreseeable future, right? You're doing something new. It's exciting, right? You're learning so much. Then you reach this position that almost feels like a plateau, right? Where purple belt, that shit is so far out of sight. Most people don't even get their purple belt. So it's like, well, I can't see the finish line now. The finish line is so far away. So the motivation almost drops instantly, right? Guys, it is so important. Now is the time to drive forward and really start picking and choosing your partners wisely, and it's not to beat the crap out of the new white belt. In fact, it's to actually give the assistance that you were once given, right? So you can give back to the community, so you can be a good training partner, so you contribute to the culture of the gym. But at the same time, you now have a group of people that you can start to really work on, right? And this is, guys, I think this is the best stage of the jiu-jitsu journey, in my opinion, because you have a whole slew of people that could still kick your ass, right? And you have a new class of people underneath you that will allow you to continue to work techniques, right? And again, this concept may not necessarily, this is one of those blurry lines, right? You could be a purple belt and still be in this situation. You could be a brown belt and still be in this situation. But normally, because you're finally past white belt, you have this demographic accessible to you to enhance your practice, right? So I hope that you guys see that opportunity, and rather than think the finish line for purple belt is too far away, you have a finish line right in front of you. You have this opportunity for short-term gratification. You just have to take the mental energy to see it and to pursue it every single class, right? So what's up at purple belt, right? Sometimes, you'll see dudes training as a blue belt for several years before they find their purple belt, right? And, purple belt's pretty cool. You can get such a wide range of skill level at purple belt. This is really where, like, if you reach your purple belt, you should have some good jiu-jitsu, right? Like real good jiu-jitsu. And it's not uncommon for a good purple belt to be taking it to hobbyist black belts, right? I don't think that we should see like a good purple belt compete perfectly, at the higher belt levels. They should still lose, right? But this is where you start to see like, people become really legit and they start giving a majority of people a hard time, right? If not giving them a hard time, they at least become annoying to roll with in terms of like a higher belt getting the best of them. They're going to have to work, right? You can't just be laying on people now. And you understand what I mean if you're a higher rank by that. So at purple belt, guys, really you should be specializing at this point. You should have great foundation, great fundamentals from every place, right? You should really have a great understanding of all basic submissions, right? And now these little details and chaining things together becomes the norm for you, right? So that armbar that you created that domino effect on, you got 2-3 variations of that armbar and can chain it into 2-3 variations of a triangle, and then back to maybe a triangle armbar variation, right? You understand the defenses of all of these moves, right? Like what can you expect from an opponent when you pull this off? So at that point, maybe I'm not saying you should be able to teach, but you should be able to explain to someone the common themes that you see within positions. And that's simply because you've spent a lot of time there. You've spent enough time pushing that domino over that you see how they fall, right? And that really, a lot of people don't make it this far because it takes discipline, right? It takes a lot of discipline and consistency. So as a blue belt, guys, if you're not consistent, guys, it doesn't matter if it's only 2 days a week. If you're not consistent, progression's going to be hard to see, right? So I certainly recommend, and this is really, the stage where people start taking it seriously and training a lot and then getting injured as well. I don't think that it is a positive aspect of jiu-jitsu culture to be proud of your injuries, right? Like if you walk into a gym and your instructor's like, oh, my neck this and my knee that and my back this and everything's broken, let's train. I don't know if that's a good example, right? If I was, you could just be riding a skateboard, right? And you break your wrist and you dislocate your knee, right? And you just continue throwing yourself down a stair set because you skateboard and that's what you do and it doesn't matter. And pretty soon you might find yourself in a position where you can't skateboard and you can't do jujitsu. And now you got to take 6 months to a year off because you got to get surgery and you got to do PT and, pretty soon you become inconsistent. So these are things to look out for because there is a really smart way of training on injuries and you can continue to be consistent with flow rolling, with drilling, with doing a lot of technique, letting on the side, you do your rehab or you're smart about who you roll with. There's so many ways to keep training on an injury in the smart way, right? But if you're somebody that always wants to roll and always wants to go balls to the wall and disregard the health of your body, you're not going to have a functioning body for long. And I understand, if you're young, that this gets overlooked very easily, whether it's because you heal fast or you don't have other responsibilities or, whatever it may be. But just understand all of us are going to age, right? And you can't necessarily avoid accidental injuries. At some point in everyone's jiu-jitsu career, they, jam a thumb, break a rib, pop a shoulder, or tweak something in some weird way. And, we're fighting and manipulating joints with resistance. So accidents do happen. So I think regardless of what stage you're at, right? I talk about this particularly at Purple Belt because if you made it this far, you're dedicated. And it's important that you stay dedicated and disciplined, but know how to change the way that you're training, right? And I refer to the 3 archetypes that I like to use in terms of the technician, the artist, and the athlete, right? That is a great opportunity to dial in your technician. You're doing a shit ton of drilling, light positional sparring from those drilling positions, right? And you can still improve at such a fast rate. And you put your athlete on the back burner for a little bit until your body is healthy, right? Or from a martial artist standpoint, that athlete archetype is being nourished through physical therapy, right? And one of the things you guys are going to see on our page more and more is how to handle your body, how to heal your body, right? 2 of my great friends, Dan and Tay, Dan being a doctor of physical therapy and, Tay being a doctor of osteopathic medicine, they are going to be introducing some, things that they like, the approaches they like to take when it comes to injuries. And, one's a brown belt, one's a black belt. So they have experience on the mat and can really relate to people when it comes to these sorts of things. So I'm excited to bring that to the YouTube page. So, one of the things I really want to talk about here, guys, and this podcast could go on for a really long time, but this is, I'd like to really summarize this. And this goes back to this position of power, right? Dominance over other people, the hierarchy in a jiu-jitsu room, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're in a martial arts classroom. It doesn't matter if you're in a corporate job. It doesn't matter if you're in a college classroom or a work group or whatever, even the relationship with your wife or your husband, right? Consciousness has a funny way of trying to manipulate and get power over people, controlling other people. This is kind of like the animal aspect of humans that, evolution is essentially supposed to do away with if someone's working on themselves. But it's really common, like super common. And we hear horror stories about all sorts of shit where the black belt in the room acts a certain way or asks something of their students that is out of line. And this is because people really start to fall in love with jiu-jitsu. They start identifying with jiu-jitsu. And they look at these people with, in this position of power. They're teaching techniques. They're telling people what to do. They can kick everyone's ass in the room. They walk around with their chest puffed out and think who they are. And all of a sudden you're washing their car and you're like, wait, what the hell am I doing? Right? Like, that's more of a joke, but hopefully it hasn't happened to anybody out there. But there are horror stories, right, of students being asked to do something, being mentally or physically abused by their instructor. And these students look up to this person, right? Because that person is in a position of power, right? And people admire positions of power. Just think about our whole culture, guys, right? The most popular things are people want to be famous. People want to have lots of money. People want to have a position at work that gives them dominance or control, right? Hell, the whole jiu-jitsu scheme here is control and dominance over another person, right? But really, the only thing we should be looking to control and dominate is that very animal aspect of ourselves, right? And this is the journey of a true martial artist, not to use your power to manipulate others, but to actually contribute to the training room, right? To be a good example for other people, not to use people, right? So this sort of stuff manifests in all different ways, right? Maybe, the instructor gets a whole clique of people and starts asking them to do weird things that don't even relate to jiu-jitsu. Or all of a sudden it's like, hey, clean the entire school for me. I'm going to go, work out over here. And all of a sudden, hey, I'm not saying that if you want to contribute to your school and mop the mats after class, that's a nice thing to do. Let's put belts aside. If you want to help someone, that's what's called being a good human, right? There's nothing abnormal about that. But when you're being demanded or used or taken advantage of, that's something that you really want to watch out for, right? And then pretty soon it's like, the instructor gives you another belt and they're like, hey, teach this class and teach that class and teach this class. And you're like, and you're kind of stuck in this position where you don't want to say no, you don't want to rub them the wrong way or, whatever it may be. But I don't want to get too into it, but just understand, guys, this is a human dynamic, right? This isn't only in martial arts, but because martial artists become like the ape in the jungle and they want to pound their chest and show dominance over other people, people do some weird shit. So it's important to really look out for that sort of culture within your gym, right? I don't think no matter what belt you are, it doesn't matter, guys. I know that there was this common unwritten rule, you don't ask a higher belt to roll, right? And that's kind of let's talk about that, right? Because there's a catch, there's something good and bad about this, because higher belts, they're a lot fewer, and everyone wants to get the most out of their mat time. So if you're somebody that's paying for a gym, you're a black belt, you're really working on your skill development, and every 2 seconds a white belt's coming up to you and asking you questions or, asking you to roll, and, your friend that you've been training with your whole life or something is over there waiting for you, or, it's people really want to get the most out of their mat time. So that's one side of it. But on the other side of it, you're not above anybody in that training room just because your skill is better than them, right? And I think as humans, let's put the belts aside. Let's put jiu-jitsu aside. As humans, if, let's think of another example, right? It's like you're at a soccer practice and you're working on dribbling or passing stuff, and someone that's not as good as passing the ball says, hey, you want to work together? And you're like, listen, you can't pass the ball for shit. I'm not playing with you. It's like, okay, hold on, right? Like, we're on a team, right? We're supposed to be working together. We're supposed to be helping each other, right? And maybe one side can't contribute as much as the other side because there's a big skill difference. But I think it's important to have a fine balance there where, yeah, you get your rolling time in, you get like, discussion with higher belts, and make sure you're doing yourself a service while you're on the mat and not just giving, but don't forget to give, right? Because at one point, and this goes for like, purple, brown, black, at one point we were in that position and we looked up to those people that had that skill that we wanted. And there was somebody that came around and helped us out. So I think that's important to pass it on, because it really, that person is going to remember what you did for them, and they're going to pass on the knowledge you gave them to somebody else. And the whole training room gets better for that reason, right? So hopefully you're not a hothead who thinks they're better than everybody else, and you roll your eyes and suck your teeth if a lower belt asks you to roll. But to each their own. So I think, brown belt here, guys, is like, it's funny because as you reach these brown and black belt stage, you simplify things, right? And someone who's really good at something can take the most complicated things, techniques, and break them down in their most simplest form, right? And when you start to master the simplicity of things, that's when you really get into the nitty-gritty of what makes jiu-jitsu techniques work. So fine-tuning all of these details and these things that people don't normally see, right, is, I think, the stage of brown and black belt, right? Because a short way I normally summarize it is like white belt, you learn what not to do, right? Blue belt, you start developing offense. Purple belt, you start creating blueprints and mind maps of these positions, or like idea webs. There's a bunch of different names for them. Brown belt, you simplify it, right? And then at black belt, you realize you're going to go back to the techniques you learned as a white belt, and you're going to simplify it even more, right? And just get better at the mechanics of everything, right? And being able to apply it on everyone in the room, even though they know what you're going to do. So it's kind of funny because you come back full circle, right? A really good black belt realizes they don't know shit, right? Somebody that's on the pursuit of knowledge and skill development never looks at themselves in the mirror and says, you got it all, right? You have the answers to everything. And if you're somebody that's on the path of looking for deeper and deeper answers, you realize the more you know, the more you don't know, right? And that just sends you on this lifestyle change of seeking, right? And I think that's really important in martial arts, right? And you see a lot of these people that they develop skill really fast, they get some fame really fast, they win some tournaments, and then all of a sudden they just drop off, right? That seeker mentality never stuck with them. Maybe they got really good for the wrong reasons and it wasn't sustainable, right? I see that with a lot of like teens, young teenagers that get good really, really fast, and they win a bunch of tournaments. They think who they are because everyone tells them they're so great, and they inflate their egos and they can't handle the success. And all of a sudden they just they just fall off. Right. So intention is really big. And as a teenager, right, you're looking for everyone's approval. You're trying to find your place. You're, concerned about the social aspects of your life. So, it's quite interesting, right? Because age, location, upbringing, the culture of the school, there's so many different factors when it comes to skill development and stages of development. And these lines definitely blur, right? But there are some hard lines that A blue belt should beat a white belt. A purple belt should beat a blue belt. So, hopefully this gives you guys a little clarity in terms of just thinking about where you are, what sort of things you want to be working on, maybe some approaches that you might want to change within your development in skill. There's a lot of things that we could have talking about today, but we'll definitely save it for another podcast. Hopefully, if you guys have any questions, concerns, comments, agreements, disagreements, throw it in the comment section, right? I think the more active we get in the comment section and we start forming a community around some of these ideas, it will only benefit the entire community, right? And when it comes to skill development, we're in this position, the jiu-jitsu culture is competition, right? You learn techniques, you keep it secret from your opponents, and you beat them. You have knowledge that holds power over other people. But I think as the culture of the world starts to change, I think there will be a day where money isn't as important. Dominance over another person isn't as important because people will be in a much better place in terms of money, living situations, education. But right now, the nature of improvement is through competition, right? But imagine all schools, right? And this doesn't work in a consumerism format, but imagine all schools were constantly sharing techniques with one another, right? We're constantly putting out their best stuff, right? The information that would get put into the global consciousness of the jiu-jitsu world, that contribution would make everyone better so much faster, right? And the skill development of the jiu-jitsu world as a whole would improve so much faster. And, that works for everyone, right? But people don't like when things work for other people because it doesn't put them in a position of power. So, keep your intentions pure, right? Do jiu-jitsu for the sake of jiu-jitsu, for learning, right? For getting better, but not worrying about, who you beat or how often somebody tapped you or when you're going to get your next belt. These are, essentially things that may motivate you, but they can put a certain halt to your progress, right? Right, such as that purple belt, skipping the warm-ups, right? All of a sudden, they're the hot shit, and they become a little lazy, and they start skipping warm-ups, right? But that's just my own personal opinion. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you for another episode in the new year, okay? Coming into 2024, so set your goals and get on the mats. See you guys around.